clapping yourself there with you as you're right in the ring.
I was clapping for you. It's just,
Hello and welcome to episode 119 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is for marketing and the F is for, well, you decide. As you're probably wondering, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm no rockstar, but I've picked up a thing or two over the last 20 years of my tour from techie to CMO and trusted advisor, and each week I chat to some true rock stars, my fabulous guests and chums, and hopefully share with you some marketing street knowledge that will inspire your inner rock star. Come say hello. We are Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn, and proud members of the Marketing Podcast Network. This episode was recorded on Friday the 17th of June. I hope you've had a good week and you are well, safe, and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. This week, Jeff Clark and I take a look at a B2B marketing research report recently published by LinkedIn. I welcome back Cathy McKnight, Chief Problem Solver at the Content Advisory, who shares a passion project. And I wind down the week in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar with my chum, Robert Rose, for a cocktail and a marketing thought. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back after this word.
We'll be right back
After this word.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
On to our first segment. I'm joined by my chum, Jeff Clark, experienced B2B marketing leader and former Serious Decisions Forrester research director. And our chat this week is inspired by a suggestion from the listener. Welcome, Jeff, back to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you, my friend?
I am doing very well. Thank you for having me back.
Jolly good. You're clapping yourself there with you as you arrived in the ring.
I was clapping for you. It's just,
Well, you should be clapping for your guitar last week, mate. That was amazing. I really enjoyed that. I only played as 30 seconds of it, but I know you played the whole song for me. That was fantastic.
Oh, I know. I went on for hours, and then you said stop, and
I was, and also, I don't know if you noticed, we also had the birds accompanying that particular conversation as well, tweeting out outside your windows. That was lovely.
That's right. They're my social tweeters. Right.
Well, there's a couple of things we've got to cover because there's a new thing on the agenda that we forgot last week, and I haven't been watching. How are our official basketball team of Rockstar CMO doing?
What?
The Boston Celtics, wasn't it?
Oh, the Celtics. Yeah. Oh, they're behind. They're behind 3-2. Oh, wait.
No.
Yeah, 3-2. So they've tonight they have to even the score, and so we'll see what happens.
Yes, I realised after we chatted about them that I'm familiar with them from the video by the House of Pain for Jump Around from and one of them is wearing a Boston Celtics basketball top, and I realised that after we were chatting. So there's a musical connection, which is always good. So that's the local sports, local weather, my friend. How are we doing?
Weather's fine. The sun is out, and it's been absolutely beautiful.
Yes, we've got a really sunny, hot day, and we're at the point now where British people say it's too hot. So anyway, let's crack on. So this week we are again inspired by a friend of the show, Irene Nehorn Kane, who I recommend people go back through our little back catalogue and listen to me chatting to her, so you get to know who Irene is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But she recommended that we took a look, and I say we in the broadest sense, really, she's talking about you, Jeff, because you're the brains of the operation. We take a look at the 5 principles of growth in B2B marketing, which was by the B2B Institute, that's funded by LinkedIn, and the actual authors were Les Binnett and Peter Field, right?
Yes.
And you had a good old look through this, and they had, luckily for this show, because we tend to have a theme of 5 things, they have 5 principles. What do you say to their principles, Jeff?
Yes, I think they did a very good job at staying within our bounds of
Yes.
It's got to be more than 4 and less than 8. So anyway, so I thought it actually was a really interesting report. Now the spoiler alert is that these guys are career ad men. I mean, they are advocates of advertising, and they're doing this. The B2B Institute is funded by LinkedIn, which likes advertisers. So, I mean, these guys are very analytical. I mean, they're math guys, and so they're looking at this thing from a data perspective. But just thought I would give everybody the spoiler alert that they're out there advocating for more advertising, not less.
So I'm listening there, and so you detected a slight bias, then, Jeff.
I mean, human beings, we're all biased. But if you have good, supporting points behind your perspective, it should be respected.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll include a link to the report in the show notes. So what did you make of their 5?
Well, I mean, I think the overall point before we get into the 5 is that you need to be investing in your brand, and not doing that, or not invest in your brand at the expense of more short-term demand generation or activation. Right. They put it in the category of activation activities,
right?
And which I think that we would agree with. I think many of the people on this that our listeners would agree with that in general. But they get into some very good specifics, and they talked about some things that were kind of eye-opening. Only 4% of B2B marketers measure impact beyond 6-month period of time. So it's like we're not. Everything is very short term. We're not looking out as to what our impact is over the long term. Only 30% of B2B marketers believe advertising has an impact on the pricing power of their products. And over 65%, believe that businesses grow by increasing loyalty, not customer acquisition. Again, they would argue that's really counter to what people should be thinking about. It's more effective to be, from a marketing perspective, it's more effective to spend your dollars on customer acquisition, because marketers are not having a big impact on loyalty.
Right.
Not that loyalty is not important. It's not that those things aren't important. It's just that what should marketing be spending money on? And so basically they look at there's in this report, there's this fancy equation, which probably took me most of my time reading the report to figure out what the equation said. But basically gets to the idea that, you're trying to look for adopters, and you're going to hit a point of diminishing marginal returns, because you've got a certain market, you've got certain people going to be early adopters. Those early adopters are going to generate some momentum for other people to follow along. But, at some point, you're going to run out of room, and you need to be thinking about, how am I expanding my market, but how am I also investing so that I maximize my returns on more of those short-term activities.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I was thinking that was interesting, because I was going to try and jump in before you went into the 5, because I thought that second point, only 30% of B2B marketers believe advertising has an impact on pricing power. That suggests that B2B marketers don't believe that a good brand can enable you to charge more, right? Is that basically what they're saying?
Absolutely. And also the fact that what do you have that can help impact the brand? And so that's where people might, they might not think of the importance of advertising. I mean, I think advertising, certainly in my experience, one of my first roles at a large, mid-sized software company was running the advertising. The company thought that was important. But as I've gone to other companies, it's like, we don't want to do that. Even as you moved from, more print to more digital, it was, it was not necessarily something that companies were keen to invest in.
This is an interesting rabbit hole, wouldn't it be, to go down? Because I think you're right. I think especially in B2B, we're very mono-focused, aren't we, on paid PPC, and we've been trained by Google that you put money in and you get money out, right? So the idea of advertising in the classic sense has gone. Although I think nowadays paid social is becoming more like old school advertising, in that you can't always attribute the impact it's making on your brand. I've seen examples of this quite recently where you can't attribute that a PPC program was running. It couldn't be attributed to any success. It stopped, and suddenly the leads dried up. It's like, there's cumulative things around the brand, isn't there, that happens, and we seem to think everything should be measurable.
The other thing that is, which I didn't find in the report that it did a really good job of necessarily defining what do they mean by advertising, because then it's like, well, do I? So obviously it's not just print ads, it's digital ads, but does it include, my paid search? Does it include, and actually one of the first principles is invest in your share of voice. Well, share of voice often can be interpreted as not just my part of the paid advertising market, but my share of the paid advertising, but it could include the share of the social market, or other things, and thinking about PR and other ways that your voice gets out there, if you will. So they're not really tight on the definitions, but anyway, I think that the points, the principles they have make sense, irrespective.
So this first point about investing in share and voice, this is invest in two sides of this, isn't it? It's to invest in measuring your share of voice. And the second part, presumably, right? Because you're going to need to do that, aren't you? And then to do activities that then move the needle on share of voice, not so much maybe on traditional things like leads.
Yes. And the basic part of the point is that, you should be investing if you want to increase your growth rates. You should be investing more in the share of voice or I should say, your share of voice should be higher than your share of market.
Right.
So I know those two things aren't exactly parallels, but it's like if you just look at it from a percentage perspective and say, I've got 50% of the advertising share out there, but I'm only at or actually maybe I'm at 65% of the market share, then obviously I'm going to be lagging in terms of my growth rate. Now, if I switch that around so that I'm investing at 65% of the market, where I've got 50% market share, then I'm going to be expecting my growth to be accelerating.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And it varies a little bit by sector, but the big point they make is that these are things that business to consumer businesses have understood for a long time, but business to business marketers and business to business companies have thought that only really applies in the consumer market. And so a lot of these things they're saying, this actually applies as much in B2B as it does in B2C, and it might be a little bit less if I'm selling transistors to amplifiers, but it doesn't necessarily. But that ratio, the principle still exists, even though it might be a slight differential between that and other industries.
No, I can see that. So basically, you're saying that there's the metric of share of market, which is where you are today, and share of voice is an indicator of where you'll be after that. So if your share of voice is shrinking, likely your share of market will be shrinking. So your share of voice is always got to be higher than your share of market, right?
Correct.
Cool. So what's the second point you picked up?
The second point is to balance brand and activation. So again, we could broadly characterize the brand investment as advertising, and broadly characterize activation as what am I doing, to get leads and help close leads. And it's like, this is one of the things, yes, we may all agree that there should be a balance, but it's kind of close to 50%. So it's like they said on average, the brand building should be like 46% of your spend, and the brand and the activation of demand should be around 54%. So it's pretty darn close to 50-50. And what the brand building does is it reduces the price sensitivity. You're basically setting the market up so that they have a favorable opinion of you, and we'll get into that a little bit later as to what how that really works. And you're making, this is one of the things I always remember is the truism about advertising. Your advertising will make your close rates work better. It'll make your your demand metrics work better. So you're basically, you're putting yourself forward in the market to make sure that those short-term activities are more successful.
Mm-hmm. So, but the interest, and I'm not sure we've got time to go into this, but I'm interested here in how, do they explain in the report how they define brand and activation? Because obviously often brand building involves a level of activation. It's just that activation isn't you don't try and attribute that revenue growth.
Yeah, they're explicitly saying activation is the short-term bottom of the funnel activities,
right?
Whereas the brand is the top of the funnel.
Yeah,
almost before you get into engagement.
Yeah. So so we'd probably normally call that demand gen, then, really, wouldn't we? At that stage of the funnel, yeah. Okay, so what's the third principle they've got?
Expand your customer base.
Okay, all right. So and we can move on to the fourth then.
Yeah, right. Because it's like, okay, sure. And I say, it seems like duh.
Yeah,
isn't that what we want to do? But again, this is getting into the trying to focus on market penetration and not relying on building loyalty. Right. Again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Is they were just saying that marketing's impact on loyalty is fairly low, whereas its input on helping to penetrate the market is high. So don't put too much of your budget on your customer advocacy programs and again, it's not to say those things are wrong. It's just to say let's look at the proportion of our spend and our effort and make sure we're putting more on market penetration.
But that point I found interesting because most marketing teams, I don't know, maybe I'm making in B2B, need to be encouraged to spend on customer marketing and retention marketing. Normally, we're driven to do customer acquisition, aren't we? So it seems interesting they identify this as a risk, whereas normally marketing teams in B2B are being encouraged to put a little bit more investment in loyalty and retention.
Yeah, and again, this gets into your own personal situations out there, and they're. I think they're trying to make a general point about balance, and so they would say, "Oh, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be working on building loyalty, or you shouldn't." And when you get into SaaS companies, there's the whole life cycle that marketing needs to play a role in.
Absolutely.
So they're not saying that's wrong. It would just be, and again, this whole thing is about growth. So it's like if you want growth. You need to be thinking about how you're expanding your base and investing ahead, as opposed to just totally focusing on the bottom of the funnel and the post funnel.
Yeah. Cool. I think we've done that one. So, what's the fourth principle?
Maximize mental availability.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. I would love to be able, at my age, I would love to be able to do that. But anyway, it basically, it's a fancy way of saying mind share. So you want to maximize the mind share of your target market out there. And so, it's a logical extension of trying to expand, your customer base, expand within an account. So, if we think about, I know a number of companies I worked at, it was like land and expand. So we get the first project, and then we figure about how we, how since they have they're more familiar with us, they know we can do great stuff. So now the next project, instead of we're gonna expand within the organization. And there are a couple of great quotes that they reference from a psychologist, Danny Kahneman. And he said, in quotes, human beings are to independent thinking as cats are to swimming. They can do it, but they prefer not to. And he also said that it's like, our brain is basically orchestrated as a machine to jumping to conclusions. So that's where familiarity becomes, it's just such a powerful driver.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, there are, 5 other vendors out there that does what ABC Company does, but, I'm familiar with ABC Company. They build a good brand, and now you get into the things like nobody ever lost their job by choosing IBM or, SAP. Oh my gosh, I always see their ads about this runs on SAP and that runs on SAP and blah, blah, blah. So therefore, once I have a taste of working with them, now my initial reaction is always going to be to go back to that. I almost have to justify and work to rationalize why I wouldn't pick somebody who I'm already favorably set up to opt for. And I think Danny Kahneman has talked a lot about, we like to think of ourselves as rational beings, and yet we're not. So, you've got to be, you got to make sure that you're setting your brand up, which actually was going to start to roll into the next principle. But it's like, you want to get the buyer on your side favorable to you, and then expand on that.
Right. And isn't this related to invest? This is like the investing in share of voice, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And so it's a kind of similar to that first point, and the idea that you need to appear sort of multiple times in front of the customer, right, to resonate with them, like you were just saying about your SAP example. Okay. Yeah. So what's the fifth?
The fifth is harness the power of emotion, and I was tipping my way into that as I was talking about the last one, but it's like emotional messaging is far more effective for this the long term, or again, if you're investing in share of voice up front, one of your things you're trying to do is you're trying to make an emotional connection with the prospects, because the rational decision or the rational messaging to make decisions is more effective when you get down to the short term. You're trying to close a deal, or you're trying to bring that lead over into an opportunity. Then that's where more of the rational thinking comes into play. So the emotional messaging is priming the pump, if you will. Mm-hmm. Because you're trying to influence people when they're not actively making a decision. So one of the things that I thought, there's a company which has recently been acquired, which I thought did a really good job of this. The company is Allocadia, so they're in the MarTech space of doing marketing, resource management, and automating processes. And they had done a really good job about talking about how you're running marketing. So there's how marketing is performing. There's how do you run marketing. And they just did a lot of good work in terms of setting themselves up as a thought leader in working with CMOs and how to run their operations more effectively, and in a category that had a lot of promise but didn't have a lot of successful vendors for a while in B2B. They were just kind of eating it up because they were constantly seeding the market with the fact that, well, this is a company that really understands how to solve this particular challenge for CMOs. And so you're laying that groundwork with setting up the brand, and making people feel as though I know there are a lot of different vendors out there we could work with, but this company, there's something about them that I really like, and so let's check them out. So appealing to the emotion of your potential buyer. Again, while you're going through the other 4 principles, you want to make sure that you are messaging on the emotional side and not purely on the rational.
Right. Okay. Well, we've kind of run out of time, so I can't really comment on any of that. So we're going to have to zoom to the song, Jeff. So there were the 5. There was invest in share of voice, balance brand and activation, expand your customer base, maximize mental availability, harness the power of emotion. And that report was the 5 principles of growth in B2B marketing by the B2B Institute, funded by LinkedIn, that I'll include a link to in the show notes. Right. So what inspired your song choice for this week, and what is it?
Well, these guys were ad guys, mm-hmm. and one of my favorite, TV serial programs to watch in the recent decade was Mad Men, which has a great theme called "A Beautiful Mind" by RJ-D2, which is not a robot; it's a guy. It actually is a guy, and I just thought it one, it's appropriate because we're talking about advertising, but what these guys are talking about is how to mine the mind of our prospects. So,
love it. And also,
a beautiful mind.
Well, it was about time the theme from Mad Men made it onto the show.
Yeah, really.
All right, mate. Well, that's splendid. And will you be back next week? And I think next week we're going to have another look at the pool, right?
It's summer. Time to hang out at the pool.
Hang out at the Rockstar CMO swimming pool and see what we should be fishing out of that, of something that somebody's...
See if we can save something.
All right, mate. Well, I'll see you then. Have a good week.
Take care.
Love you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jeff. And that was RJD2 with A Beautiful Mind from 2006. I was a huge fan of Mad Men, so delighted to hear that again. And I don't know about you, but I now fancy an old-fashioned. Sadly, since recording that on Thursday, our beloved Boston Celtics did not win the NBA final. Congratulations to the Golden State Warriors. Anyway, I will, of course, include Jeff's links and a link to that report in the show notes. And if you have any suggestions, you can find us on the socials at Rockstar CMO or contact us through our website. On to our guest, who regular listeners might remember, as this is her fourth appearance on the show. Industry chum Cathy McKnight is VP Strategy and Consulting and Chief Solver of Problems with the Content Advisory, where she shares her 20 years of global experience and expertise in content strategy, content management, intranets, customer experience, and the tech that help make these things happen with some fabulous Fortune 100 clients. But as much as I love to geek out on all things content, this week we're not going to talk about that, as Cathy shares a passion project she is working on. Hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi, Cathy. Welcome back to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you?
I'm well, Ian. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. Was the last time we spoke, we were actually in person, wasn't it?
It was. We had a lovely evening out in London, a couple of beverages, and yes, it was a great night out.
Yes, splendid. Well, it's always good when, I've known you forever, and it's always good when our paths crossed. But for people that didn't have the opportunity to meet us in the pub, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. So I am the other half of the Content Advisory with Robert Rose. My official title is Chief Problem Solver. And I work on all things content. So content strategy, content operations, content tech-related selections and analysis. And I've been immersed in that for about 15 years now. It seems a long time now that I think about it.
Well, I've actually been in content management a little bit longer, so maybe you shouldn't worry too much.
All right.
And you've been on the show before, so hopefully some of the listeners will remember you from that. Now, the reason why I wanted to get you on is because you've started a new project called Uncharted Journeys, and some of the guests from this show are going to hopefully chat to you. And sorry, I should ask you, what is it?
So Uncharted Journeys is a passion project that I've been thinking about for a while. I've done some writing on in the past on women in our industry in particular, and the lack of representation. And when there is representation, how often, there's Women in Tech Summit and it's in the basement off to the corner of a major event, right? Not on main stage, which is where the conversation should be happening. Because, the shout out to the vendors that have done that in the past. They've had some amazing women speak, but they're isolating and they're preaching to the choir, right? Because it's a room full of women and it's off the main stage. Whereas these women have amazing stories and experience and insights to share, things that everybody would benefit from hearing, and really just perpetuates the whole, isolation and lack of shared space and stage time. So I got cheeky a couple of times in a couple of blog posts, and I finally decided, I'm like, you know what, you can't just talk about it, you got to do something about it. So Uncharted Journeys is an opportunity for me. So it's very selfish, an opportunity for me to speak to some just fabulous women about their journeys. And it's not all just, content and marketing tech type people. I'm speaking with authors and entrepreneurs, agency leads, and it's fascinating. We have a great conversation, and it's been fun so far. I've got 5 or 6 in the can. So it's a learning curve. I appreciate the work that you put into yours now a little bit more. You don't just get up and turn on the mic. There's some prep to be done. So but it's been fabulous.
It's booking the guests is often quite something you don't appreciate. And then, I was very impressed with your first episode because it sounds so well produced. And that was one of the things that I struggled with at the beginning, was getting the production right and investing the time in the production. So whoever's doing your production, is it you?
It is me. And
Nice,
it's a learning curve because I've haven't done my own production before. I've worked with other teams, like in a proper studio, but GarageBand has quickly become my friend, and learning the difference between like MP3s and waves and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. And
what's interesting, to your point, I'm going to knock some wood here, is I have been so flattered and humbled by the enthusiasm. I reached out to several industry friends, people that I've known for a long time, personal friends that I've known for a long time, including yourself. And thank you so much for the referrals. I've got 2 booked of the individuals that you connected me with. And everybody has been so gracious and excited about coming on the show. So I just posted my 3rd episode this week. I've got 3 more in the can already, and I've got 6 more queued up. So,
nice. And you're publishing weekly?
I'm publishing weekly on Tuesdays at unchartedjourneys.net, and it's just been fantastic.
And it's now available on all good podcasting jukeboxes.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. So Spotify and Apple, and I'm a bit challenged with Google for some reason. That's not working out so well. But is anybody really listening?
I think I don't know. I don't know what everybody else's experience is with their podcast, but I'm part of a marketing podcast network, and we compared some of our stats, and the majority of us get most of our traffic from Apple.
Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And the weird thing for me is I get a lot from Pandora, and if somebody's listening on Pandora, please give me a thumbs up. But I can't access Pandora because it's not available in my country, which is really strange.
So isn't that interesting?
I'm live on Pandora, and I get a fair number of listeners are on Pandora. Hello to the listeners on Pandora. So that's a bit, and I like the fact that you're using a GarageBand, which is or GarageBand, because that's the approach I took as well. And everybody's talking about these new tools, and there's some great tools out there, but I'm like, I've now got my process. I can't change my process.
100%. I support you in that.
Did you get the GarageBand inspiration from Robert Rose? Because I think he was the one who put me onto it as well. So.
No, it was the one that I had. I'd used it a couple of times before for some personal stuff. And I thought, okay, well, I've used it before. Let's start with what you know, right? So, and it was surprisingly easy, with the exception of my 2nd episode that I spent probably, a good 2 hours editing and producing and whatnot, and inadvertently deleted one of the tracks and then saved it without realizing I had deleted it. It was one of those insta-seconds where you press save and then you notice that there's a bar that's empty. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I had to totally reproduce Nicola's part of the discussion, but you know what? That's okay. It's part of the learning curve.
Yeah. No, it's always the way, and it's my Saturday morning, so it's now my hobby. It's what I do.
Yeah.
So, and apart from how to produce a podcast, we could probably not why I included you. Well, sorry, invited you. Included you is the wrong word. Invited you onto the show. What have you learned so far from the amazing conversations we've had? I mean, I've listened to the first few, and like I say, super well produced. I thought the first conversation you had with Meg
Walsh,
Meg Walsh. I mean, I've seen her speak before. We've both known. Well, I know of her. You actually know her from the old Gilbane days and stuff. Really, really good conversation, both from a content person's perspective as well as discovering her personal journey. But what have you learned from all the interviews that you're doing?
So some of the things that I've been surprised, because of course you start off with friends and family, right? So I've known everybody. The first 4 that I did were I would consider friends or industry friends at least, and finding out more about them as kids. So what they wanted to be when they grew up. So Nicola, I'll take as an example. She wanted to be a teacher. That is the last thing in the world I would have ever expected her to want to be, except for maybe to have her summers off because she loves the sun and being outside and stuff like that. But one of the common threads is once they decided what they wanted to do, so, into high school or early university, college, they were focused. Like it was, that's what I want to do. And even if they started off in a program that didn't exactly align, you wouldn't think, oh yeah, of course you started school for engineering. Of course you're going to end up in the content space. But there is a natural thread, and they followed their passion. It was the individual drive and push that each of them have shown to get to where they want. They've carved out niches in their space. They've carved their path with purpose. My journey has been a little more zigzaggy, as I say at the intro of of the podcast. But I'm surprised at the very purposeful, they had a line of sight where they wanted to end up and they got there. Not surprised that they got there, just the fact that it was so purposeful, I think is one of the things that I found interesting. And of course I asked them, what would the song be for your career?
Yes.
And the diversity of music is great.
It must be really interesting if you're talking to people you already know, because it does happen a little bit on this podcast as well, where I talk to somebody and I never really knew. I've known them as a marketer or whatever. I didn't know what they did before, and you get some really interesting conversations. But I think that purpose is interesting, because as you were saying that, I was thinking about my own daughters, and in fact, we were talking about it before I hit record, is both of them have a very clear idea about what they want to do that was formed around sort of 18, 19. I mean, my youngest is 18 and she's recently decided, this is what I want to do. And there is no, that's absolutely what she wants to do. And it's the same with my 21-year-old as she's at university. She knows exactly what she wants to do.
Yeah.
Now. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know if it's a girl thing or whether it's just, that's the way you need to be. And is that part of, do you think that determination is what women need in order to go forward, if I'm putting this correctly?
Yeah, no, I get it. And, it's interesting. One of the things that I purposely don't do on the podcast is talk about the fact that we're women. I don't talk about the struggle of finding balance between home life and career and family and stuff like that, because that is still a thing. And it is, we're going to stop using the C word soon, but that is one thing that COVID really brought back. It really set women back, because it was the women that were pulled out of the workforce to compensate for the kids being at home from school, for the families that needed more support, elderly parents and those kind of things. It didn't balance out. Whereas, the workforce has, as far as participation, not pay yet, but so I'm purposely staying away from those conversations. But I think, we do, as women, we have to push harder. We have to self-advocate stronger, louder. And it's not always receptive or received well. Because, and I'm not getting on a horse or a soapbox here.
Help yourself.
Yeah, I'm not getting on a soapbox here, but, the perception is a strong woman can often be referred to as, the B word or, and that kind of thing. Whereas for men, it's strong. And I've bumped into that on, I think, in every gig that I've ever worked at, with the exception of my current one. It's interesting. It's so I try and stay away from that. This isn't meant to be. And the women that I speak to, I've had two people say, I don't want to talk about that stuff. It's like, don't worry, we're not gonna, because that's not what this is about. This is about you. This is about your journey, and really sharing, hopefully inspiring not just other women, but anybody who wants to figure out what they want to do. That it's okay not to have a clear path. That it's okay to try different things. And that it's in the trying of new things and different things that you learn and move forward. So
quite a few things there I want to ask you about. The first one is while I completely, absolutely agree, because women tend to be the carers, COVID more negatively affected women in the workplace. But do you think that the fact that COVID has led the line on flexible working for everybody. And I was in a management team meeting this morning, and we were actually discussing this and the way that people are now working, and that we as an employer need to give people a bit more space and a bit more flexibility in their day. Do you think that that's actually ultimately going to help everybody? So men that want to get more involved with childcare, women that want to spend more time on their careers. Do you think that actually COVID, as it washes out, is actually going to have more of a positive effect for women than the negativity it had initially?
It should.
It should, yeah. It should. Oh my God! But on this issue, so much is should, isn't it?
It really should, because I've been very, very fortunate. I've been traveling with my job for 15 years, and my kids are 18 and 21. So my husband has been nothing but 100% supportive. There's never been you're traveling again, right? Mm-hmm. It's always been, okay, what do we need to do? I've had the good fortune of having family that's close who stepped in as when the kids were young. We never had to have a babysitter. We did childcare, but that kind of thing. So he stepped up, no questions asked, and always has. There's other men who, I wish I could, but my work doesn't allow for it. And now that it does, they'll find another reason why, or that flexibility will become more time to golf, right? Seriously. I've already seen it. So it's
but that's a negotiation between partners. I mean, my wife is chose to be a stay-at-home mum, and I think that at some point our society needs to level up to say, look, that's just as good a choice for a woman as being, as hustling, right? And we all need to be given those options. Right?
Listen, being a stay-at-home mom is the toughest job you can do. Honestly, my kids are still here to tell their story because I was not a stay-at-home mom.
How can you say that when she's married to me? Good Lord.
Full transparency. And after this call, I'm sending your wife a bottle of champagne. But it is a choice. And I have friends who chose to stay at home, and they're fantastic mothers, and they did wonderful things. And I respect them immensely. There is zero judgment. And people who judge women or men who choose to take that big of a part of their children's lives, then there's something wrong with them, not with the people staying home.
Yeah, and I mean, my sister runs her own business, is very focused on her business, and she's had to juggle those. And you can, a lot of the conversations, if we talk about that kind of stuff, is that split for her? Is there, of trying to focus on both, and it's incredibly difficult. But anyway, we're 15 minutes in already, Cathy. I knew this would happen, but yes, fascinating to it. And if I was to interview you for your own show, I think you've shared it already. What experience would you share about your experience, apart from having a great partnership?
Yeah. So partnership, whether it's work, whether it's personal, family, whatever it is, having that support is really, really important. But self-advocacy, going for what you want. I've tried to instill in our kids that if you don't ask, you don't get. Yeah. So that doesn't mean that if you come and ask me for a car, that I'm going to buy you one. But you don't know if you don't ask, right? So I think asking for what you want, being able to back that up, so you don't go into into a meeting with your manager and say, hey, I want a 20% increase in pay. You go in and have the conversation with your manager saying, hey, I've looked at studies. I understand the bandwidth. I understand there's other people who are doing my job who are getting paid more than I am. I think this is fair and equitable pay, and this is why. So always have backup. I'm a big, have the data behind you. Don't just ask, have a reason why. And don't be afraid to try new things. I mean, my career has been all over the place. But I have taken something away from each role, from each boss or manager, and from each environment. I've worked for startups on a few occasions. I've had my own startup, all the way up to, being a serial number 365147 at IBM.
You remember your number?
We had serial numbers. We didn't have employee IDs. We had serial numbers, which tells you a little bit about IBM. And I learned very quickly that I am not a big company girl. I love working with big companies. We've had I totally consider it a privilege to work with some of the largest, like Fortune 50 companies in the world. And we get a line of sight into things that even people in their own companies don't get to see. And I love that, but I am not a big company person. Like I will never go back to that. And it's just like we talk about with strategy is you got to know what you want to do and what you like to do as much as you've got to know is what you don't want to do and what doesn't work. And you don't learn that unless you try.
Yeah. What I quite enjoy, and I wanted to say something during your last point, is when I read some of this advice for women, I think so much of it. I mean, I'm slightly introverted. I'm the quiet. Often, sometimes the quiet person in a meeting and all that, or the imposter syndrome. All of these things that I read, these experiences that women are going through. This would get me into trouble, won't it? If I say I'm just saying I understand. I don't know what. It's just I often get quite a lot from these conversations people like you have with your guests in terms of their experience, because I think a lot of it is good advice for everybody, and I think it's the same with. If you're looking for a pay rise or you're looking to advance, like you say, if you don't ask, you don't get, but support it with the data you have. And I think that's good advice for everybody, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know, Cathy, if I was saying anything wrong, you'd pull me up on it. So
100%. And what I think is interesting too is, you talk about being an introvert, and, anybody who met you wouldn't think that, when you're out having conversation and you turn on this persona. Which is exactly like me. I would, my perfect day is, we were talking before we started, sitting in my yard with my garden and a book, and some good music, underneath our parasol and, just being, or going for a bike ride. But I am perfectly happy to spend time and more comfortable spending time alone than I am in a big group. But that's another thing that I've learned is, I can get up in front of a stage and talk to 1,000 people, which I've done. But God, don't invite me to a cocktail party where I don't know anybody.
Or a networking event. Yeah. Oh my God, no, please. I love it. And can you believe it, Cathy? We're up to time. And I had so many other things I was going to ask you about your day job. So I'll have to bring you back to talk about some of the things you've been talking about. And we can actually get back to talking about content. But your show is fascinating. Excellent start. Really nicely produced. And I would encourage anybody to go listen to that.
Thank you so much.
Uncharted Journeys. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you, Cathy?
Well, now unchartedjourneys.net, as well as the usual Twitters at Cathy McKnight and LinkedIn. And also, Robert and I have just recently launched Experience Advisors, which is a new coin and NFT dabbling into the Web3 world. So check that out, Experience Advisors. And please. And if
that's experience, I know that's experienceadvisors.io, and
correct.
I've actually got Robert on the show later, or I'm recording this week's episode with Robert later today. Okay. So hopefully he'll share a bit more of that as well.
I'm sure he will. And for anybody listening, any ideas on great women to interview, or if you are one who would like to be interviewed, please reach out. I'd love to connect.
I will include all of your links, Cathy, in the show notes, and I encourage anybody, whatever walk of life they come from, to talk to you anytime. So
you see them, all of it.
Thanks, Cathy. Look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Cathy. We intended to briefly chat about her podcast, Uncharted Journeys, and then dive into some of her work, but I got a bit carried away there. Great topic, and I'll definitely be getting Cathy back to talk about content. In the meantime, I recommend listening to her show, which I will link to in the show notes. Right, it's Friday evening. Time to wind down in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar and find my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose, chief troublemaker at the Content Advisory, for a cocktail and a marketing thought. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend, and welcome to the end of the week, and welcome to the bar. And boy, looking at my portfolio in the stock market and my cryptocurrency holdings, I need a drink. There's no doubt about it. It has been a rocky week, that is for sure. And I'm best not to open any of those little apps up on my phone.
Yes.
Here's the thing. This week, I decided that we were going to have something to make us feel better about where the economy is right now. And so it's a drink that we're just calling a bad day at work. And it works if you're feeling like you need to just sort of, forget the week that was past or forget the economy. Actually, funny enough, I had a really good week when it comes to my own.
I was going to say the same, actually. I said, I've had quite a good week too. And today has been like the hottest day of the year for like ever or something like that. And so you know what it's like with us in the UK. If it gets too hot, then it's too hot and we complain. But, obviously.
Yeah, right.
So we've had a beautiful day today and I've had a very good productive week. But I'm all up for drinking, whatever it is, mate. So what's in a drink? What's a drink for a bad day at work?
Well, here we go. So, as I have been wont to do on this show when talking about cocktails, that I very rarely use sugar.
That's true.
But boy, is this drink just loaded with it. Because we need it. So here's the way it works. It's called the bad day at work, and we get a sugar. Now, the recipe actually calls for quite a bit, up to a cup of sugar. We're not going to use that much.
What is it, Coca-Cola?
We're not quite ready that depressed, right? But a good amount of sugar. And then the best gin you have, which does not it's going to be a little difficult for you, but not too difficult. A really good gin, and then here's the key ingredient, which is clementine oranges, which is a really key distinction, not just normal oranges, which is actually probably easier for you to find in the UK than it is for me here in California to find clementines. But the clementines have a very specific taste. So that's the one sort of key core ingredient there. And then you want the juice, probably 3 to 5 clementine oranges. You'll need this amount of juice for this. So you mix that together. And then basically do this in a shaker, the gin, the orange juice, and the sugar, so that you can basically pour this into, whether you're going to pour it into a tumbler or whatever your favorite glass is. Then a splash of seltzer water, or it could be club soda, but sparkling water is probably a little better for this. And that will be a nice, refreshing drink for a hot day, but also, assuming you've put the right amount of gin in, which, I put quite a bit in because, after I saw the amount of juice that 3 to 5 clementines produces and the amount of sugar there, I said, I better add a lot more gin. So I added a lot of gin there, and it makes a lovely, wonderful way to forget what's going on in the world.
I can't imagine the combination of all that sugar and alcohol.
It's not one that you want to have more than a couple of, because you're going to wake up the next day with a splitting headache, which is not going to make you feel better about the rest of the world, but it may or may not make you feel better about your own life.
All right. Well, I'll attempt to make that very drink using the ingredients on my desktop bar. I'm going to replace all of that sugar with just some really large ice cubes, if that's all right. So I've put in some ice there. I'm going to go with the nicest gin that I can find, which would be Hendrick's. So pour some of that in, and I think you're right.
That's in the range of nice gins for sure. Yeah.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, I wasn't saying it was the nicest gins. It's one of a range of gins one could enjoy, right? And then you're right. Clementines are very easy to find here. Only not so much on my desktop bar. So I'm going to trust the folks at Fever Tree to decide what it is that I'm going to put in here. I bet you can get orange flavoured tonic water, but mine's using the most English of clementines, the cucumber. And flavoured with the cucumber. So let me give this get the lid back on that. Right. Oh, that's very nice. Very refreshing.
I can see that.
I could drink one of these after a bad day at work, that's for sure. Probably every week.
There it is.
And what are we calling those, Robert?
Well, we're calling it a bad day at work, but it could really fit into just about any kind of feeling of, disappointment, let's say, in the world around us.
Fortunately, I'm not getting the sweetness, so hopefully the big headache and the buzzing sugar rush isn't going to hit me quite so hard. So I'm hoping this interview goes well on that basis. Or this conversation in the bar. It's not really an interview, is it? And so where are we going to be drinking these amazingly refreshing yet sweet drinks?
Well, that's a really good question, because, however we're feeling these days about the economy, one of the things that I'm feeling particularly disappointed in is how expensive it is to travel anywhere right now.
Good Lord. And how hard it is. And how, here it's crazy.
It is just absolutely insane. I just got back from Cleveland, where I'm not even exaggerating this, I spent the same amount of money that I spent last year to go to London as I spent to go to Cleveland. And that was sort of the tipping point for me.
Yeah. And Cleveland's lovely.
Let's be honest, London is better than Cleveland. So.
Yes. Yes. I've been
and apparently it's further away too. So
yeah,
you would think. In any event, I think we have to. This is one of those times where I think what we're going to do is be virtual. Like you and I are virtually meeting and having this wonderful, disappointing cocktail, because being at home in each of our respective homes after we finish the discussion will probably make us feel better. Plus, we're going to be in no condition to go anywhere after finishing this. So.
Well, I mean, that was the idea of the Rockstar CMO virtual bar, wasn't it? Because it started in lockdown. It was where we were going to transport ourselves. So finally, we've done full circle, and we're actually virtually taking our bar virtual.
That's right. Virtually taking the bar virtually in person or something. Yes.
And so in our virtual bar, and this seems a bit strange because I'm actually asking you in the virtual bar what we're going to talk about. Once a conversation has turned from how many times we can get virtual into a single sentence, what would we talk about, Robert?
Well, I think it's about giving our content and marketing strategy our sort of mid-year checkup, right? We are right here at the mid-year point, almost exactly, in fact, by the time this airs. And when we think about the mid-year checkup, one of the things that I have found useful, especially this year with everything going on, you've got COVID challenges and global conflict and the economy and inflation and all the things that we just talked about, ugly politics, certainly here in the U.S., all of it seemingly like distracting and very distracting. And the interesting thing is what it made me think of, and I was thinking of this as I was speaking with a colleague last week, was this concept of loss aversion. And that it's a whole thing, the idea of loss aversion, which is it's a psychological thing, which is it describes basically how people feel the pain of losses more than the pleasure of gains. In other words, what research has shown is that someone who loses $100 will lose more satisfaction than that same person would gain from winning $100. Mm-hmm. And so it affects us all the time, right? And especially those of us in marketing. The perfect example of this is the classic still good advice that says you should send an email out to every one of your, subscribers on your newsletter list and say, basically, if you don't re-opt into this thing, you're going to get unsubscribed. And we don't do that. We never do that. We're scared to death of doing that because we're more afraid of losing subscribers than we are excited about the possible increase in the engagement levels that we would get from doing that. And so there's a related theory, and this is what really made me think of it, which is to loss aversion. It's called loss attention. And what loss attention is where we tend to allocate more attention to a task or a situation if it involves loss than when it doesn't. In other words, our attention is focused on the thing that we don't want to miss based on the fact that we don't want to lose rather than something that we want to win. There's a wonderful, if not very lighthearted example of this that you can actually see on YouTube, where it's a psychological test. It's really fun to take. And I'm going to spoil it by telling you what the ending is. But basically, if you go, the test basically tells you, watch this video very carefully of this group of people and only pay attention to the people in the white T-shirts and count how many times they pass the basketball to each other. And there are 6 or 7 or 8 people, 3 or 4 of them wearing white T-shirts, and they're all passing the basketball back and forth. And your attention is solely focused on not losing this game or this challenge. And you watch all the people in white, and what you inevitably miss is the gorilla, the person in the gorilla suit who walks through the middle of the crowd, beats its chest, and walks off. And when they've done this test with groups of people, only 42% of the people who are actually watching the video actually see the gorilla.
Wow.
And that's a great example of this lost attention, where we're so focused on not losing the challenge that we don't see the bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And now here, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we need to ignore all the experiences that are happening around us, or the economy, or crypto, or the world global conflicts, and all those kinds of things that are going on right now. But as we do our mid-year checkup when it comes to our marketing, and especially our content strategy, what we're doing, it can be good to sort of just be aware of that, be aware of all those distractions, because one of the things that can happen is we can overlook progress that we've made, basically by not being aware, or we can fail to see what's working despite the fact that we have current conditions, right? One of the, like we were talking about in the beginning, right now, my business is pretty darn good. And it's despite the current conditions, or what may be failing only because of those conditions. In other words, supply chain and all the things that are happening right now could be causing us to discount initiatives that may be working in a normal world, but may not be here. So it's just being aware. It's taking that. And the way I find that best to do that is just take a pause. Take a deep pause from everything. Take a deep pause from what's going on in the world, from what's going on in business. And I find that there are these 5 simple questions that you can write down and take a time to really write answers to. And it just helps me with one, list out the 3 to 5 most significant areas of progress in the last 6 months, let's say, if we're doing a half-year checkup. But it could be last week if you want to do it weekly. But the 5 most significant areas of progress in the last 6 months. 2, what are the biggest rocks that are in your way? Where are you stuck? And be really specific. 3, what are the top 3 actions that you could take to become unstuck? And by the way, doubling down or letting something ride, that counts as an action. Then 4, what's the best case and worst case results of each of those actions? And then lastly, what's the biggest learning? What's the biggest learning you've had from the last 6 months or month, or whatever time period you're doing to reflect on, and work on that, and just take a pause and answer those. Sometimes I take a week to answer those questions. Sometimes I take, 10 minutes to answer those questions, but taking that pause can be really helpful in doing your mid-year checkup for whether it's marketing or content or really anything that you're doing in your life.
I love it. And I've often heard you talk about, your goals and priorities and how to fit. So I really like this kind of advice. So for you personally, do you do this like on a monthly basis? I mean, you said there sometimes it takes you a week to come up with these questions. What sort of pause are we talking about here? And what should people do with these 5 questions?
Well, what I do is I just turn off the outside world to the extent you can for, to really reflect on these questions. And, like if I'm doing a half year checkup, I'll probably take, multiple days to do this, right? In other words, I'll write out my answers. I'll think about it, look at it, consider it in context with everything else, and really write all of it out over the course of the day. Now, if I'm doing this on, like reflecting on a week or reflecting on the last month, yeah, maybe I'll spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes doing this.
Yeah.
And, it's a great, by the way, exercise to do. One of my favorite times to do this is after a keynote or, a class that you've taken or, something where you've actually sat for some considerable amount of time getting input.
Yeah.
And it's just a great way to process input. And, so we often get all this input after we read a book or watch a keynote or take a class or do something, and we never process it, right? We just sort of let it sit there. And this can be a great way to sort of organize your process for all of that input you just received and see what might be the things, you may want to do about it. Like, what do you want to do about this keynote that you just listened to or this class you just took? I find it just great in terms of a mid-year checkup. It's just something that I like to take a pause on. But the most important part of that is shutting out, not being distracted by basically the gorilla walking through beating its chest, right? It's basically being focused in on not letting the distractions of the world affect the decisions we make in a negative way.
Oh, this is really cool. I can imagine this model working with teams, even if you're reflecting as a team on what you've achieved as a marketing team. So it'd be interesting if you ever use that in your workshops. I think that's great. And here on Rockstar CMO, we love lists of 5. We always talk about lists of 5 in the session with Jeff. So 5 simple questions. I like that. And have you written down these 5 simple questions anyway?
I have. It is the end of the very first module of my workshop class.
Oh, wow.
And it is it sort of helps tee up the rest of, a lens to look through the rest of the modules. Uh-huh. So I've written it down there. And then it is also part of stuff that I'm writing for. Of course, I've written it down for, our own website and those kinds of things.
And your own website would be?
Oh, thank you. Wow. Teeing up the... basically, you can find all of this wonderful stuff at our little hovel on the web called contentadvisory.net.
Splendid. And you've just kicked off something new. Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, we've got a new thing that it's a little community built for... It's called Experience Advisors. And it's really built for those that are focused on the topic or the idea of customer experience and content. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? It means, well, if you're, we separate these folks not by segmentation, but just simply by, interest into, 4 areas, basically. We've got strategists, those who actually advise clients or their bosses or their teams on the use of content, customer experience, and media. We've got storytellers, those who actually create this kind of content and stories. And then we have students who are basically those who want to learn about, the trends that are going on and these can be young people or old people, quite honestly. Who are interested in learning about content experiences and customer experiences. And the last are what we call sparkers, which are maybe somebody who's not really on the inside of customer experience or creating those contents or anything like that, but, can spark an idea, can be that which ignites something disruptive or interesting in the way that we think about content. So experienceadvisors.io is our new community where it's application. We're basically not trying to set up a big velvet, rope or anything like that with a big bouncer in front, but we do make it by application only, just to make sure that we're, having the community be people who are interested in participating with that student's mind rather than somebody who's going to come in and pitch something or something like that.
Geez. Yeah, you got LinkedIn groups for that.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And that I'll be there. So, and then apart from the contentadvisory.net and experienceadvisors.io, when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you, Robert?
Oh, you'll mostly find me on LinkedIn these days. I'm finding LinkedIn to be very valuable these days. And, as long as Elon keeps his mitts off Twitter, I'm on Twitter as well.
Splendid. All right. And then most importantly, will you be in the bar next week?
Of course.
I will see you then. Thank you, mate. Have a good week. Thank you, Robert. We love 5 steps here, and I'll definitely be giving that process a go. So, that's a wrap on episode 119 of the Rockstar CMO effing Marketing Podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks again to Jeff, Cathy, and Robert for sharing their insight. Please say hello to them. I'll include all their links in the show notes, which you can find on your favourite podcast app or rockstarcmo.fm, where you can also find all our previous episodes. But most of all, thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. So, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? Let us know on the socials or drop a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, as you heard, Jeff and Robert will be back. I have another returning guest, Christopher Willis, CMO of Acrolinx, and I'm really looking forward to that. Until then, have a great week, and I hope you'll join us again next week here at Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.